The forest was a shroud of evergreen, an endless sea of pines and firs that whispered secrets in the wind. It cradled my cabin, the last outpost of humanity before the wild reclaimed its dominion, a lone sentinel amongst giants. From the porch, I could stare into the verdant abyss, and it would stare back, indifferent to the man who dared to make a home at its fringe. Nothing but the occasional caw of a raven broke the silence, reinforcing just how cut off I was from everything resembling the world I once knew. Another day, I murmured to the trees, watching as fog curled around their trunks like wraiths dancing at dawn. No response. As expected, solitude was a demanding companion, silent yet oppressive in its constant presence. I stepped off the wooden planks, my boots sinking slightly into the loamy soil, damp with the morning's dew. The scent of earth and pine needles filled my nostrils, a smell I'd come to associate with peace, a far cry from the acrid stench of gunpowder and blood that once painted every breath. Dan, I chided myself softly. Keep your head here, not there, but memories are relentless predators. They stalk you, waiting for your guard to drop. As a ranger, I learned to be vigilant, to anticipate the strike. But in these woods, my enemies were phantoms of my own making, specters of war that clung to me more stubbornly than the mud on my boots. Stop. I did stop, freezing in place, not because of the command, I gave it to myself, but because of the stillness that suddenly enveloped the woods. A chill traced the length of my spine, nature's eerie quietude filling the void left by my halted footsteps. Something primal within me recognized this silence as a prelude to danger. Probably just a deer, I reasoned, though the hand that once steadied a rifle was now clenched at my side. My eyes scoured the tree line, seeking out any movement, any hint of life aside from my own labored breathing. The isolation of this place was both a balm and a curse. It ebbed away the chaos of war, only to replace it with an unnerving tranquility where every snapped twig sounded like a footstep, every shadow a lurking threat. "Nothing's there," I insisted. Though my voice lacked conviction, it was a strange thing to yearn for solitude yet to fear the very isolation I sought. In Afghanistan, the enemy was flesh and bone. Here, in the depths of the wilderness, the enemy wore my face, haunted my thoughts, turned respite into a battlefield of a different kind. "Get a grip, Dan." The words slipped out between gritted teeth as I forced my feet forward, my gaze fixed on the clearing ahead where my garden awaited. "You're safe. This is your sanctuary." But even as the words formed a shield around my heart, the forest loomed large around me, a reminder that some wars are never truly left behind, and some battlefields are as much within us as they are underfoot. "Chores first," I muttered to myself, stepping into the cool embrace of dawn. My fingers worked methodically, checking the lines of the snares I'd set the night before. Each motion was deliberate, a step in a well-rehearsed routine that kept the chaos at bay. The crunch of fallen leaves underfoot was a percussion that marked time as I patrolled the perimeter. My boots found familiar grooves in the earth, the paths worn by countless similar treks, always the same circuit. I reminded myself as if forgetting would mean slipping back into the abyss from which I'd come. The sun hung low in the sky, a hazy orb that filtered through the dense canopy of pines and firs surrounding my cabin. The air was still, carrying the scent of loam and growing things. I stepped out, the wooden porch creaking underfoot, and made my way to the small clearing I had cultivated into a vegetable garden. "All right, let's see how you're doing," I muttered to the plants, as if they could respond, kneeling beside the first row of tender green shoots. My fingers were methodical, plucking unwelcome weeds with a soldier's precision, each invasive plant an enemy to be vanquished from my sanctuary. Sweat beaded on my brow, not from exertion, but from the intensity of focus. This was more than gardening. It was a ritual, a fight for life amidst memories of death. With the garden tended, I stood and dusted off my hands, casting a wary glance at the enclosing woods. There was a quietness there that seemed too deep, as if waiting to be filled by something sinister. Shaking off the unease, I grabbed my fishing gear and headed toward the creek, the sound of flowing water slowly overtaking the silence. "Gotcha!" The word erupted from me, triumphant, as the rod bent and I reeled in my catch. "Nice try, but not today," I said to the trout as I unhooked it, admiring its iridescent scales that shimmered with life. For a fleeting second, I saw not the fish, but the reflection of a man who'd once been a soldier, now searching for redemption in the ripple of a creek. Back you go, I continued, releasing the trout back into the water. Its disappearance beneath the surface was like a secret shared, a pact between the wilderness and me. We were both survivors, after all. Tomorrow, I promised the forest, my words hanging in the air as I gathered my gear, we'll do this dance again. And with that, I turned back towards the cabin, the weight of solitude settling on my shoulders, a mantle I bore with equal parts resignation and resolve. The underbrush crunched softly under my boots as I made my way to the first of several traps I'd set out along the perimeter of my territory. The forest was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves that whispered secrets only the wild could understand. My hands, scarred and steady from years of service, worked with a practiced ease as I checked each trap for signs of success. Empty again, I muttered to myself, resetting the snare with a precision honed by repetition. It was a dance I knew all too well. Set, check, reset. A rhythm that provided a semblance of control in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. The air was damp with morning dew, thick with the scent of pine and earth, a fragrance that should have been comforting, yet it carried an edge that pricked at my senses. Each snap of twig underfoot resounded like a gunshot in my ears. Each shadow cast by the swaying trees felt like an omen. I approached the next trap, and there finally was a rabbit caught within the metal jaws. "Sorry, pal," I said, almost apologetically, as I extracted the animal. Its eyes, wide and unseeing, seemed to pierce through me. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across the forest floor. I could feel the weight of the coming dusk. It pressed against me with an almost palpable force, stirring the unease that never quite left my side. "Nothing's going to happen," I spoke into the silence, a feeble attempt to dispel the growing dread. But the words sounded more like a question than a statement echoing among the towering pines. The forest seemed to watch me, its gaze impassive yet intense, as if it were waiting for something, or someone, to shatter the stillness. And in those moments, as the light faded and the darkness crept in, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. "Tomorrow," I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath, "it'll be different." But as I trudged back to my cabin, the promise tasted bitter on my tongue, tainted by the knowledge that while the traps would remain the same, the darkness that awaited me was ever-changing, always lurking just beyond the tree line, ready to ensnare me like the creatures of the forest. The cabin, a solitary sentinel amidst the encroaching gloom, seemed to hunker down as if bracing itself against the coming night. I stepped onto the weathered porch, my boots thudding heavily on the wooden planks, the sound discordant in the encompassing silence of the wilderness. The creak of the door echoed like a gunshot as I entered my refuge, the only shield from the vast expanse of untamed forest that stretched for miles, swallowing any notion of civilization. "Safe," I muttered, locking the door behind me, a ritualistic whisper to ward off the unknown. The night draped itself over the forest like a shroud, its darkness pierced only by the occasional silver lance of moonlight that managed to find its way through the dense canopy above. I remember how the trees, those ancient sentinels, loomed large against the indigo sky, their silhouettes jagged as they swayed in the wind, whispering secrets in a language too old for me to understand. "Easy," I murmured to myself, my voice barely rising above the rustle of leaves and the groan of bending boughs. "It's just the wind." But even as I spoke, the words felt hollow, swallowed up by the vastness of the woods enveloping my cabin. I stood there, outside the warmth of my shelter, gazing at the forest that had become both my sanctuary and my prison. The trees were dense here, their branches interlocking like the fingers of intertwined hands, forming a barrier that was at once protective and isolating. They moved with the wind, a ceaseless dance that cast moving shadows upon the ground, shadows that twisted and turned in ways that set my nerves on edge. "Dan, you're seeing things that aren't there." I chided myself, but the sound of my own name on my lips sent a chill down my spine. The darkness seemed to press in closer, and I could almost feel the weight of unseen eyes upon me. I watched as the boughs undulated, an eerie mimicry of waves on a stormy sea. There was a rhythm to it, a relentless push and pull that matched the unsettled beat of my heart. It was as though the forest itself was breathing, alive with a presence that was not quite natural, the same presence that had been haunting the edges of my consciousness. "Damn this place," I muttered, the frustration clear in my voice. "Damn these woods and the tricks they play." But even as I said it, I knew the fault lay not with the trees, but with the man who sought refuge beneath their boughs. Keep it together, Dan. It's just your mind playing games, I thought, trying to anchor myself to reality. Turning back toward the cabin, I glanced once more at the forest. The wind continued to whip through the trees, their branches creaking and groaning like the bones of the earth shifting in restless sleep. And then, ever so faintly, I caught the scent of something, a smell that didn't belong, metallic and out of place. Probably nothing, I reassured myself, yet the unease remained, coiling in my gut like a living thing. Inside, the light from my cabin windows offered a beacon of solace, but the shadows that clung to the periphery suggested that perhaps solace was simply another word for ignorance. Tomorrow, I vowed, I'll check the perimeter again just to be sure. It was a promise to myself, but more than that, it was a plea, a desperate hope that come morning, the world would make sense once more. But deep down, in a place where words were useless and thoughts took on a life of their own, I knew better. The forest held its breath, and so did I, waiting for the night to reveal its secrets. The night had a way of making the familiar strange shadows stretching across my cabin floor like dark fingers reaching for something just out of sight. I leaned back in the creaky wooden chair, the sound of sharp punctuation in the stillness of the room. My hand trembled slightly as I set down the mug, its contents long since cold. Another peaceful evening, I muttered to myself, the words feeling hollow even as they left my lips. But peace was a fickle friend, here one moment and gone the next, chased away by the rustling whispers of the forest outside. I stood, the bones in my knees, protesting as I moved toward the window, my eyes scanning the dense tree line. That's when I saw it, a fleeting shape, more shadow than substance, moving with an unsettling grace on two legs that should have belonged to a man, but as I peered into the moonlit wilderness, the creature, or whatever it was, vanished from my sight as if it were never there at all. My heart hammered against my chest, a relentless drum warning of danger, or perhaps heralding madness. Probably just a bear, a big one, I reasoned aloud, my voice barely convincing myself. I stepped outside, the cool air slapping my cheeks, a sobering reminder that my mind could be my worst enemy. I needed to check, to prove to myself it was nothing. Each step felt heavy, laden with dread as I cautiously made my way around the cabin perimeter, my hand resting on the hunting knife, sheathed at my hip, a security blanket I hadn't needed in years. Come out, I half sang to the night, a trick I'd used to steady my nerves before a firefight. Nothing but trees and critters here. But the silence answered back, thick and unyielding, as if the forest itself held its breath. I returned to the cabin, the warmth of the interior doing little to thaw the chill that had settled deep within my bones. The fire crackled mockingly, a beacon of safety that seemed so feeble now. Sleep would not come easy tonight. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind against the windows would be that creature returning to haunt me, and I'd lie there, straining my ears for the impossible, wondering which side of sanity I'd wake up on come morning. The full moon, a witness to the unspeakable, bathed the clearing in an ethereal glow, its light betrayed by the shadows that danced just beyond my sight. There it was again, a hulking silhouette that seemed to drift between the trees as if woven from the darkness itself. "Are you real?" I whispered into the void. My voice barely a hitch against the backdrop of rustling leaves, or are you just another ghost? It was vast, larger than any man, standing on two legs with a presence that felt like a gravitational pull. Its fur, blacker than the depths of night, shimmered under the touch of moonlight, alive with an otherworldly sheen. The eyes, though, were what cemented the terror in my gut, glowing amber, piercing through the veil of night, fixating on me with an intelligence that no mere animal possessed. "Go on then," I taunted, a hollow bravado lacing my tone. "Show yourself." I brandished the flashlight like a talisman, its beam slicing through the dark, but all it caught were fragments of movement, a flash of fur here, a glint of those eyes there, never the whole creature at once. I paced back to the porch, the weight of the rifle in my hands more comforting than the sturdiness of the cabin's walls. With every stride, I scanned the tree line, hoping and dreading to catch another glimpse. It was playing with me. I could feel it in my bones. My heart thrummed a discordant rhythm, my breaths uneven as I tried to steady my aim on nothing but shifting shadows. "Come out!" The shout ripped from my throat, raw and desperate. "What do you want from me?" The forest in response grew eerily silent, and for a moment so did I. My mind reeled, grappling with the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the war had never ended. Perhaps it had followed me, morphing into this beast that stalked my nights, leaving me yearning for the clarity of a bullet's path instead of this maddening uncertainty. But as I turned to seek refuge within my cabin once more, there it was, an unmistakable outline against the window pane, its breath fogging the glass momentarily before disappearing into the night. My pulse hammered against my skull, a cacophony of fear that drowned out reason. The world outside had retreated to a mere whisper, but inside my skull it roared. I paced the floorboards of my cabin, each step a thunderous echo in the void left by silence. My fingers brushed against the aged wood of the table, seeking solace in its solidity. Yet nothing could anchor the tempest within. The window pane. The fogged glass had been real. The cold sweat that clung to me was real. The gnawing dread that something out there had eyes full of moonlight and malice was all too real. "Who are you?" I whispered into the emptiness, half hoping for an answer, half terrified it might respond. The rifle leaned against the wall, its dark barrel a stark contrast to the pale logs. It offered a promise of defense, or perhaps offense, against a foe I couldn't even be sure existed. I shivered, a convulsion that seemed to start deep in my marrow and ripple outwards. My hand reached for the rifle instinctively, its familiar weight a morbid comfort. I checked the chamber, the metallic click joining the symphony. "Let's say you are real, huh? What then, you gonna come in here and try your luck?" I taunted the shadows that gathered at the edge of my vision. It was easier that way to turn fear into anger, to pretend I was back in a war zone where the enemy was flesh and blood, not figments of a fractured psyche. "Come on, show yourself!" My challenge hung in the air, unanswered. Only the wind, a sly conspirator, whispered through the trees, rustling leaves in a mockery of footsteps. My knees buckled, and I found myself sitting hard on the floor, the rifle across my lap, a silent sentinel. I stared at the door, half expecting it to burst open, to reveal the nightmare made flesh. But it remained closed, as impenetrable as the mystery that tormented me. Maybe they'd be better off locking me up, I mused, the thoughts spiraling. At least then I'd know I'm crazy, at least then I wouldn't be waiting for some fairy tale monster to rip me apart. I rose slowly, limbs heavy with fatigue and fear, and moved to bolt the door. The clunk of the metal sliding home was a note of finality. In the reflection of the small dust-smeared mirror next to the entrance, I caught a glimpse of myself, haggard, eyes wide and darting. Sleep would not visit me that night. Instead, I lay in wait, listening to the sounds of the forest and the creaks of the cabin settling. Or was it something more? Every shadow seemed pregnant with possibility, every noise a prelude to revelation. The line between vigilance and paranoia blurred until it was indistinguishable. As dawn broke, casting feeble light through the gaps in the curtains, I was still awake, staring at the ceiling, the afterimage of the beast etched into the backs of my eyelids. Was it out there, watching, waiting? Or was the true horror confined to the space behind my own eyes? Back in Harland County, cradled by ancient mountains shrouded in mist, my days unfolded like chapters of a haunting novel. Guilt and isolation clung to me like the persistent fog, swirling around the memories that haunted every corner of our small town. The shadows of a past tragedy gripped my soul, and the once vibrant threads of family happiness were torn forever. It all began with my father's disappearance, a vanishing act that left behind an emptiness too vast to comprehend. The aftershocks rattled through the years, a silent tremor that shattered the foundations of our family. The true abyss opened when my younger brother, Lewis, followed suit. A void that swallowed my innocence, leaving behind the bitter aftertaste of perceived failure. The last image of Lewis lingered in my mind, painted in the hues of a setting sun that cast long, ominous shadows across our backyard. I had been entrusted with his care, an innocent responsibility that became a nightmare when sleep claimed me. As the world faded into dreams, so did Lewis, leaving me with the suffocating weight of a momentary lapse that irrevocably altered our lives. In our once lively home, my mother became a distant figure, navigating the sea of her own sorrow. The walls echoed with the hollowness of grief, an unspoken agony that widened the chasm between us. Growing up, my life transformed into a purgatory where whispers and sidelong glances painted me as the haunted boy, a living reminder of the tragedy that had befallen our family. Amidst this desolation, a flicker of warmth emerged in Rachel. Her laughter, like a sunbeam cutting through storm clouds, became my sanctuary. Her kindness acted as a healing balm, momentarily soothing the wounds of my fractured soul. For a brief, ephemeral moment, I dared to believe in a life beyond the ghostly echoes of my past. Yet hope is a delicate thing, easily trampled by the looming shadows of secrets buried beneath its serene facade. The day Rachel went missing, tranquility shattered, replaced by the panic that gripped our community. The town whispered of a malevolent force, a returning specter that sought to claim its toll once more. Driven by a desperation I could no longer contain, I embarked on a journey through the hidden corridors of Harlan's history. Old newspapers, forgotten journals, and the eerie tales passed down by the townsfolk unveiled a dark truth lurking in the forest. The legend of a creature born of collective nightmares. As I delved deeper into the mysteries surrounding Rachel's disappearance, I found myself confronting not just the literal monster in the woods, but the metaphorical ones that had long tormented my soul. The journey became a reflection of my inner struggles, a path that meandered through the twisted corridors of my memories. The forest transformed into a crucible of nightmares where the air was thick with the scent of pine and the ground crunched beneath my footsteps. Each revelation led me deeper into the heart of darkness, where the trees stood like silent witnesses to the ghosts of my past and the monsters spawned from my own guilt. With every step, the shadows clawed at my resolve, threatening to pull me into the abyss. The pursuit of Rachel became a battle not just against the beast I was certain had taken her, but against the shadows that clung to my heart. I knew that confronting the creature meant facing the darkest corners of my own past. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the desolate clearing where I stood. My heart hammered in my chest, a steady rhythm of anticipation mingled with fear. The time for hiding was over. It was time to face the beast that haunted both this forest and my own tortured memories. As I ventured deeper into the darkness, every sense was heightened, attuned to the faintest rustle of leaves or distant growl. The forest seemed to breathe around me, alive with secrets and echoes of lost souls. Shadows danced on the tree trunks, morphing into grotesque shapes that seemed to taunt me, mocking my determination. With each step, I felt a tremor of uncertainty crawl up my spine. Doubt gnawed at me like a ravenous beast, whispering insidious thoughts of failure and defeat. But I pushed those thoughts aside, gripping tightly onto the flicker of hope that burned within me. Finally, as if in response to my unwavering determination, the forest yielded its secret. I stumbled upon a hidden cave nestled deep within the thicket of trees, its entrance obscured by ancient moss and tangled vines. The air grew colder, chilling me to the bone, as I cautiously entered the darkened abyss. The cave was an otherworldly realm, adorned with stalactites that shimmered like icicles in the dim light. The echoes of dripping water reverberated through the silence, amplifying the eerie atmosphere. The ground was littered with bones, remnants of unfortunate creatures that had fallen victim to whatever lurked within. The air inside the cave was dank and musty, carrying the scent of wet earth and decaying matter. The echoes of water dripping from the stalactites added a hint of freshness to the dampness, yet also an eerie chill that sent a shiver down my spine. As I stepped deeper into the cave, the air grew colder, and I could feel the chilling touch of damp stone against my skin. My hands brushed against the walls, feeling the uneven texture of the rocks and the smooth, icy stalactites. My heart pounded in my chest as I followed the winding path, the darkness swallowing me whole. Every step felt like a descent into the belly of the beast, drawing me closer to an unknown fate. The air grew thicker, heavy with anticipation and the scent of damp earth. The deeper I ventured, the more the cave revealed its secrets. Strange markings adorned the walls, etched with precision and purpose, symbols I couldn't decipher, a language lost to time, whispered of ancient rituals and forgotten tales. The flickering light from my flashlight danced upon the symbols, casting eerie shadows that seemed to writhe and twist. A chill ran up my spine as I stumbled upon a chamber hidden within the depths of the cave. Its walls were adorned with grotesque paintings, depicting scenes that defied logic. Hulking figures with feral eyes and elongated limbs seemed to leap out from the stone, frozen in a perpetual dance of madness. The darkness enveloped me, swallowing the feeble light from outside. Every breath I took echoed through the cavern, a reminder of my own vulnerability in this desolate domain. The ground beneath me was slick with moisture, causing me to tread carefully, lest I lose my footing and descend into the abyss below. As I ventured deeper, my footsteps became softer, as though the cave itself was urging me to tread lightly. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of water or the distant scuttling of unknown creatures. The darkness seemed to thicken with each step, wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. A sense of impending doom settled over me as I pressed on, driven by a mix of curiosity and desperation. The deeper I went, the more I felt the weight of the cave's ancient secrets pressing down upon me, threatening to consume my very soul. It was as if the darkness itself had a malevolent presence, a sentient force that reveled in human suffering. A hushed whisper echoed through the labyrinthine cave, bouncing off the walls and stirring an eerie anticipation within me. It was a sound that didn't belong to the natural world, a voice that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the earth itself. Goosebumps prickled my skin as I strained to decipher the words, but they remained just out of reach, teasing me with their elusive meaning. The air grew heavier, saturated with a palpable tension. Shadows danced and twisted along the cave walls, their jagged edges playing tricks on my mind. Every now and then, I caught glimpses of movement in the periphery of my vision, fleeting figures melting into the darkness before I could focus my gaze upon them. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest as the darkness seemed to close in around me. The whispers grew louder, their words twisting and distorting into an incomprehensible cacophony. Fear prickled at the nape of my neck, urging me to turn back, to flee from this unholy place. But I knew that I couldn't, not when Rachel's life hung in the balance. Pressing forward, I rounded a corner and froze. Before me stood a massive underground chamber, the ceiling stretching impossibly high above. A faint glow emanated from the center of the room, casting an ethereal light on the walls adorned with more grotesque paintings. As I approached the source of the glow, my breath caught in my throat. There, Rachel lay unconscious in the corner. Her chest rose and fell slowly, her face peaceful despite the situation. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave as I rushed to her. But relief turned to despair when I saw her emaciated state. My mind raced, wondering what to do next, when I hear a low growl behind me. I whirled around to see a pair of yellow eyes emerging from the darkness. I froze in terror as the beast rose up on its hind legs, snarling. It stood over 7 feet tall, a bipedal canine-like monster with the torso of a man and a fearsome howl that made me duck and cover as though the cave would collapse. Its eyes seemed to glow with piercing intellect, sending shivers down my spine as they fixated on me. The beast stood tall and imposing, its body a twisted blend of human and canine features, its limbs long and muscular. Its snarling mouth revealed pointed teeth, ready to strike. The stench of damp fur and decaying flesh lingered in the air, coming from the beast's breath as it panted and growled. A metallic tang lingered in the air, reminding me of the blood that coated its claws. I gagged. As the beast rose on its hind legs, I could see its muscles rippling under its matted fur, the heat emanating from its body causing my skin to prickle with goosebumps. Its claws were sharp and deadly, ready to tear into flesh. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood paralyzed before the creature, my mind racing to find a way out of this dire situation. The beast's growl reverberated through the cavern, filling the air with an undeniable aura of danger and impending doom. I searched desperately for anything that could be used as a weapon, my eyes darting around the chamber. But the cave offered nothing but cold, hard stone and bones that served as haunting reminders of those who had come before me. With each passing second, fear tightened its grip around my throat, choking off any rational thought. The beast took a menacing step forward, its growl vibrating through the chamber and reverberating within my bones. Fear surged through me, immobilizing me for a heartbeat before instinct kicked in. I scrambled to my feet, clutching Rachel's unconscious form tightly against me, desperate to shield her from the imminent danger. The creature's eyes narrowed, its primal instincts honed in on its prey. It lunged towards me with lightning speed, its claws extended, ready to tear into my flesh. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I dodged the attack, narrowly escaping the deadly swipe. But the monster's momentum carried it past me, crashing into the cavern wall with a thunderous thud. Seizing the opportunity, I sprinted towards an alcove on the far side of the chamber, seeking refuge and a momentary respite from the beast's relentless pursuit. The creature let out an enraged howl, shaking loose fragments of stone from the ceiling as it recovered from its collision with a primal fury. As I huddled in the alcove, my mind raced for a plan. The beast circled around, its growls echoing off the walls, its yellow eyes scanning the chamber for any sign of movement. I glanced down at Rachel, her unconscious form a stark reminder of the stakes at hand. With a surge of determination, I knew that I couldn't let fear paralyze me any longer. I had to protect her, even if it meant facing this monstrous creature head-on. Searching frantically, my eyes fell upon a jagged rock wedged between two boulders nearby. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. My hands trembled as I gripped the makeshift weapon, preparing myself for what lay ahead. The beast charged towards me once again, its eyes burning with a feral rage. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I thrust the sharp rock forward, aiming for its vulnerable chest. The makeshift weapon sunk deep into the creature's flesh, eliciting a bestial howl of pain and fury. But my victory was short-lived. The wounded beast retaliated with a ferocious swipe of its claws, slicing across my arm. The searing pain shot through me like wildfire as blood poured from the wound. The pain was all-consuming, like a wildfire raging through my body, leaving nothing but scorched earth in its wake. My arm throbbed with each beat of my heart, a constant reminder of my encounter with the beast and the battle that had just begun. As I stumbled backwards, the taste of iron flooded my mouth, a metallic tang that made me want to retch. It coated my tongue, making it difficult to swallow or breathe. The world spun in circles around me as I fell to the floor, reaching out for Rachel's hand helplessly as her screams faded with my consciousness. When I woke in the hospital, the doctors said my arm couldn't be saved. The good news was Rachel seemed to be all right, all things considered. She was weak and shaken, but alive. The doctors assured me that her recovery would take time, but she had survived the ordeal. Relief washed over me, mixed with a lingering sense of guilt for my inability to protect her from the creature. As days turned into weeks, I found myself haunted by the memories of that night in the cave. The darkness seemed to seep into my very being, leaving me sleepless and plagued by nightmares. Each night I would relive the encounter with the beast, each swing of its claws reopening the wound on my missing arm, causing me to wake up drenched in cold sweat. Rachel was discharged from the hospital, her physical wounds healing faster than my own. But the emotional scars remained, etched deep within both of us. We tried to find solace in each other's arms, seeking comfort in our shared survival. But it was clear that we were forever changed by that experience. Still, I was grateful to have saved the life of someone so special to me somehow. When we found out she was pregnant, I was overjoyed. I tried to hide my own fears surrounding her condition, and she was terrified herself. But now the doctors say there are complications, and her symptoms are unlike anything they've seen before. As the weeks went by, Rachel's condition worsened. She grew weaker by the day, her body drained despite an insatiable appetite and growing belly. As a first-time father, I haven't the slightest clue what to do next. But I love her, and I'll never give up. I know we can get through this together. It all started with a series of disappearances. Hikers and campers gone without a trace. The woods, once my sanctuary, had become a realm of dread, duty called, and armed with nothing but a flashlight and a gnawing unease, I plunged into the abyss. The trail was barely visible, obscured by the overgrowth that had swallowed it. The trees loomed over me, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and grab at my ankles. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. I pushed forward, determined to find some answers. That's when I heard it, a faint moaning coming from somewhere up ahead. I quickened my pace, my heart beating faster with every step. As I rounded a bend in the trail, the source of the moaning came into view. A woman lay crumpled on the ground, her clothes torn and bloodied. I rushed to her side, my hands shaking as I checked for a pulse. To my relief, she was still alive, but barely. Her eyes fluttered open, and she managed to gasp out a few words before slipping into unconsciousness again. "They took us. The creatures. They're not human." My blood ran cold at her words. I knew all too well the legends of the creatures that lurked in these woods, creatures that had been brought to life by the fear and dread of those who dared to tread too far into their territory. I lifted the woman onto my shoulders, determined to get her to safety. As I carried her through the dark forest, my mind raced with questions. Who had taken her? And why? The answer came to me soon enough. A group of men, armed with guns and knives, stepped out of the shadows, blocking my path. The woman, still unconscious, slumped against my back. One of the men stepped forward, a sneer on his face. Hand her over, and we might let you live. I didn't have time to think. Instinct took over, and I lunged at them, using all my strength to fend them off. But it was no use. They were too many and too well armed. I felt a sharp pain in my side as one of them plunged his knife into me. I collapsed to the ground, the weight of the woman on top of me. The men laughed, kicking me in the ribs and taunting me as they dragged the woman away. I watched helplessly as they disappeared into the darkness, their cruel laughs echoing through the trees. Blood seeped from my wound, staining the forest floor. I knew I was going to die, but something inside me refused to give up, to let those men get away with what they had done. With a surge of energy, I lifted myself up, gritting my teeth against the pain. I had to follow them, had to save the woman. The trail of blood they left behind was my guide. I stumbled forward, my vision growing blurry from loss of blood. But I refused to give up. Finally, I saw them. They had set up camp in a clearing, a fire blazing in the center. The woman was tied to a tree, her eyes closed. The men were standing around the fire, drinking and laughing, unaware of my presence. I crept closer, my hand reaching for the knife still lodged in my side. It hurt to move, but I pushed past the pain and focused on the task at hand. But I wouldn't get my chance. As I steeled myself for the attack, a horrid screech shattered the silence. My would-be victims instantly turned in my direction, and for a moment I was sure I'd been seen. I watched helplessly as something tore them to shreds. It all happened so fast, the last of them barely had time to flee. But he was bleeding profusely, and didn't make it far before the creature seized upon him, his screams of pain and anguish quickly turning to wet crunching and gurgling. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The creature was unlike anything I'd ever encountered before. It was massive, covered in fur, with razor-sharp teeth and claws. Its eyes glowed in the firelight, reflecting a primal intelligence that sent shivers down my spine. But as terrifying as it was to behold, it didn't seem to have any interest in me. Instead, it prowled around the campsite, sniffing at the corpses and licking up the blood. And then it turned its attention to the woman, her screams growing more frantic. I'd like to say I had the guts to do the right thing in that moment, to charge out in a suicidal effort to free her before the inevitable happened. But I didn't. I just stayed where I was, frozen in terror as whatever this thing was feasted to its satisfaction and wandered back into the endless forest as suddenly as it had appeared. I never go back there anymore, and for what it's worth, I try to steer others clear too. I guess that's why I'm telling you now. Whatever you do, stay on the trail and never stay out after dark, or else you just might be another one I can't save. All right, that should do it, I said, slamming the rear door of my friend's Jeep. The four of us had planned the trip into the mountains for months. We were all college seniors and had been friends since our freshman year. This trip was supposed to be our last hurrah before we graduated and went our separate ways. As I climbed into the back seat, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and anticipation. I'd always loved the outdoors, but I had never been this far into the mountains before. The air was crisp and cool, and the towering trees around us seemed to stretch up towards the sky. My friend, Tom, was driving, and he turned the ignition, revving the engine. "Let's do this," he exclaimed, a big smile on his face. As we made our way up the winding mountain road, the sun began to set behind us, casting long shadows across the landscape. We drove for hours, stopping occasionally to take in the breathtaking views and snap some photos. Eventually, we arrived at our campsite, a small clearing nestled in the heart of the forest. We quickly set up our tents and built a fire, the flames casting a warm glow around us as we sat around it, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. "You guys know we shouldn't be camping out here, right?" Tom announced suddenly. Why's that? This was your idea, genius, I ribbed. Well, Tom smiled. Let me tell you, this land is supposedly cursed. Legend has it that a group of settlers came here years ago and they were never seen again. They say their spirits roam these woods at night, seeking vengeance for their untimely demise. I rolled my eyes. Tom, come on. You don't honestly believe in ghosts, do you? Right. Tom shrugged. I don't know what to believe, man, but I heard some weird noises last night. It sounded like someone was walking around our campsite. I shook my head. Probably just a raccoon or something. Or what? I scoffed. Was your plan to bring us out here and watch for ghosts? Laugh all you like, Tom retorted, but keep an eye out. All I'm saying. I rolled my eyes, but as the night wore on, I began to feel uneasy. The woods were eerily silent, and there was a strange energy in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone out here. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream shattered the stillness of the night. We all jumped to our feet, our hearts pounding with fear. What the hell was that? I exclaimed, looking around frantically. My eyes met Tom's, his face pale with terror and excitement. Come on, he said. I told you, let's check it out. Tom started from his seat. No way, said Sarah. I'm not going out into the woods at night to find some wild animal. That was no animal, Tom said. We could have the chance to see something really, truly supernatural here, shouldn't we? I don't know, document this. I rolled my eyes again, but part of me was curious. I'd always been fascinated by the supernatural and the unexplained. But the rational part of me knew better than to go traipsing off into the woods at night, chasing after some unknown creature or apparition. I don't know, Tom, I said, trying to reason with him. It could be dangerous. We don't even know what we're dealing with here. Come on, he urged. We have to at least try. Imagine the stories we could tell if we find something. I sighed, feeling the peer pressure mounting. Fine, I relented, but we stick together and we're careful, and we turn back at the first sign of trouble. Tom's face broke into a grin. That's the spirit, he exclaimed. We grabbed a few flashlights and made our way out of the clearing and into the dense forest. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers in the darkness. Every rustle of leaves made me jump, and I felt as if we were being watched. As we walked, I noticed that the forest was changing, becoming more twisted and gnarled. The trees looked like they had been dead for centuries, and the air grew colder and thicker around us. Now, Tom, are you sure about this? I asked, my voice shaky. Yeah, man. We're just getting started, he replied, his eyes darting around eagerly. Suddenly, we heard another scream, this time closer. It sounded human, and it sent chills down my spine. Hello? Sarah called out, her voice shaking. Is anyone there? There was no answer, only the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. We followed the noise, our flashlights bobbing up and down in the darkness. As we rounded a corner, we saw it. A figure standing in the distance, silhouetted by the moonlight. It was tall and slender, with long, spindly limbs and skin as white as snow. Its eyes were glowing red, and it stood motionless, watching us. Guys, what is that? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom was the first to step forward, his curiosity getting the better of him. I don't know, but let's go closer and find out. I hesitated. But my curiosity got the best of me, and I followed them as we approached the strange figure. As we got closer, we realized it was a woman, or at least it had once been a woman. Her skin was stretched tight over her bones, and her eyes were sunk deep into her skull. Her hair was long and matted, and she wore a white dress that was torn and stained with blood. Are you okay? Tom asked tentatively, his voice shaking. The woman didn't move, but her eyes locked onto us, and she let out a low guttural growl. Suddenly she lunged forward, her body contorting in unnatural ways as she moved towards us. We all screamed and stepped back, but she was too fast. Before we knew it, she was upon us, her long, bony fingers wrapped around our throats. We struggled and fought, but we were no match for her. She was too strong, too powerful. As everything went black, I couldn't help but wonder if Tom had been right. Were there really supernatural forces at work in these woods? Or was this just a case of our overactive imaginations getting the best of us? Either way, it was too late now. We were trapped at the mercy of something far beyond our understanding. As a park ranger, I know these caves like the back of my hand, or at least I thought I did. Sometimes people go missing. Hikers lose their way or visitors vanish from the trails. Some are found, but others... Still, nothing I'd experienced in all my years could have prepared me for this nightmare. I was responding to reports of an injured hiker near the mouth of one of the caves. As I approached the cave, I noticed that the entrance was different. The rocks that usually block the entrance had been moved. The darkness inside seemed to stretch out forever. I hesitated for a moment before taking a deep breath and stepping inside. The air inside was musty and damp. My flashlight barely made a dent in the darkness. I could hear the sound of dripping water and my footsteps echoed eerily. I walked for what felt like hours, checking every nook and cranny for the hiker. As I was about to turn back, I heard a faint cry for help. I followed the sound and found the hiker, bloodied and crawling on the ground. He was in bad shape, so I immediately called for backup. As I waited for help to arrive, I noticed something moving in the shadows. I shone my flashlight in its direction and saw a pair of glowing eyes. At first, I thought it was a wild animal, but as it stepped closer, I realized it was something far more sinister. The creature was humanoid in shape, but its skin was black and scaly, with eyes that glowed like embers. Its mouth was full of razor-sharp teeth that gleamed in the dim light. It looked at me hungrily, as if I was its next meal. I tried to back away slowly, but the creature lunged at me with incredible speed. I barely had time to dodge its attack. I drew my gun and fired, but the creature seemed unfazed. It charged at me again, its claws slashing through the air. I knew I had to get out of there, but the hiker was still lying on the ground, unable to move. I had to protect him. I grabbed a nearby rock and hurled it at the creature, hoping to distract it. To my surprise, the creature recoiled and hissed, giving me just enough time to grab the hiker and drag him toward the exit. The creature followed us, its glowing eyes fixed on me as we stumbled through the darkness. I could hear its heavy breaths and the sound of its claws scraping against the cave floor. I knew we were running out of time. We burst out of the cave and into the fresh air, but the creature was still hot on our heels. I pushed the hiker towards safety and turned to face the creature, still brandishing my gun. The creature let out a deafening roar and charged at me with a renewed ferocity. I fired my gun again and again, but it seemed to have no effect on the creature. It was like shooting at a brick wall. The creature lunged at me, its jaws wide open, ready to tear me apart. In a moment of desperation, I remembered the rock that had stunned the creature in the cave. I scanned the ground for something to use as a weapon and saw a large stick. I grabbed it and swung with all my might, connecting with the creature's head. It let out a piercing cry and stumbled back, giving me an opening to escape. I didn't look back as I ran, heart pounding in my chest. I heard the creature's furious roars and the cries of the unfortunate hiker behind me, but I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my truck. Shaking uncontrollably, I grasped the steering wheel to brace myself as I fumbled with my keys in the ignition. Finally, turning it over, I put the pedal to the floor and never looked back. I thought I'd made it. I thought that was the last I'd see of that thing, but I was wrong. That creature haunted my dreams, and I could hear its snarls and roars in my head. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there waiting for its next victim. It wasn't until I received a call from my fellow rangers that I realized my worst fears were true. There had been another attack. This time, it was a group of young hikers who had ventured too far into the caves. The creature had descended upon them, tearing them apart with its razor-sharp claws and teeth. By the time my colleagues arrived, it was too late. The group was decimated, their bodies torn to shreds. I was wrong. The creature had caught the scent of my fear, and it was not about to let me get away so easily. No matter where I go, I know I have to go back to that place every day, to its domain. The others don't believe me. They say it's just wild animals and I dare not press the issue, but one of these days I wouldn't be able to avoid it any longer. I just knew it. Sure enough that night, as I lay in my bed, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched. I could hear movement outside, but when I looked out the window, I saw nothing. I tried to shake off the feeling and go back to sleep, but I couldn't. My mind kept replaying the events of that horrible day in the cave. Suddenly, I heard a noise coming from the living room. I slowly got out of bed, heart racing, and grabbed my gun. I made my way to the living room, gun at the ready, but when I switched on the light, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. I dismissed it as my imagination and was about to turn back to my bedroom when I heard a sound coming from the kitchen. I crept toward the kitchen, heart pounding, my gun outstretched in front of me. As I approached the kitchen, I could see a shadowy figure moving in the darkness. My hand trembled as I aimed my gun at the figure, ready to fire if necessary. As the figure stepped into the light, my blood ran cold. It was the creature from the cave, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly intensity. I fired my gun, but the creature was too quick. It dodged my bullets effortlessly and lunged at me with frightening speed. Its claws tore through my flesh, and I screamed in agony as I fell to the ground. The creature's jaws snapped at me inches from my face, but I managed to grab the nearby kitchen knife and plunge it into its side. The creature howled in pain and retreated, disappearing into the night. I was left bleeding and gasping for breath, staring at the knife still clutched in my hand. I knew this wasn't over. The creature was still out there waiting for its next opportunity to strike, and I was now a part of its game. I loved my brother, Matt. All brothers do, I suppose. But I still remember his smile the last time I saw him. The last time anyone did, for that matter. That was 7 years ago. He was always out there. Said he knew there was something in those woods, something evil. It takes people that go a little too far off the beaten path. Of course, we all wrote it off as nonsense, but that didn't stop me from retracing Matt's last known whereabouts every year. Every year I would go back to that place where my brother disappeared. It was like a pilgrimage for me, a way to keep him alive in my memory. As I walked through the dense trees, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to him. Had he stumbled across something he shouldn't have? Was he attacked by an animal? Or was it something more sinister than that? I'd come prepared this year with extra supplies and a GPS tracker. I wasn't going to make the same mistakes that Matt did. I was going to find out what happened to him, no matter what it took. As I walked deeper and deeper into the woods, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was like I was being watched. Suddenly I heard a twig snap behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. My heart was racing as I pressed on. I had to find out what happened to my brother. As the sun began to set, I stumbled upon an old cabin. It was in terrible shape, with the roof caving in and the walls covered in moss, but it was the only shelter I had for the night. I cautiously stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The cabin was pitch black, but I could hear something moving around inside. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking with fear. As the beam of light hit the walls, I saw something that made me freeze in terror. There were claw marks etched into the wood, as if something had tried to break in. And then I heard it again, a low growling sound coming from the darkness. I slowly began to back away, but then I heard something that made me stop. It was a whisper, a voice that sounded like my brother's. "Help me, please," it said. I turned around, my flashlight illuminating the figure standing in front of me. It was Matt, but he wasn't the same person I remembered. His skin was pale, his eyes were glazed over, and his clothes were tattered and torn. I couldn't believe my eyes. "Matt, is that really you?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. He didn't answer, but instead took a step closer to me. His eyes narrowed, and I could see a savage hunger in them. I realized then that this wasn't my brother. This was something else entirely, something that had taken over his body. I tried to back away slowly, but he lunged forward, his hands outstretched and his teeth bared. I screamed and ran out of the cabin as fast as I could. I could hear him chasing me, his inhuman growls echoing through the forest. I wasn't sure how long I ran for, but eventually I found a stream. I plunged into the water, hoping to lose whatever was chasing me. I stayed in the water for what felt like hours, my body shivering from the cold. Finally, I mustered up enough courage to climb out and continue my journey. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every time I turned around, I saw nothing but darkness and trees. I realized then that I had to find a way out of the woods and fast. As the dawn broke, I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center of it stood an old tree. It was unlike any tree I had ever seen before. The bark was black and twisted, and the branches hung low, blocking out the sunlight. I felt drawn to it, as if it was calling out to me. As I stepped closer, I saw something etched into the bark. It was a symbol I had never seen before, but it was pulsating with an eerie energy. The stench of rotten flesh and sulfur permeated the air around the tree. The air felt heavy and damp. There was a tangy, bitter smell in the air, an odor of decay and death about it, though very faint. I knew then that this was the source of the evil that my brother had warned me about. And as I stood there staring at the symbol, I could feel something inside of me stirring. It was like a dark force was calling out to me, tempting me, and I knew that if I didn't get out of there soon, I would be lost forever. But just as I turned to run, something grabbed me from behind. I tried to scream, but a cold hand clamped over my mouth, muffling my cries for help. I struggled against my attacker, but it was no use. They were too strong. The world began to spin as I was lifted off my feet and carried deeper into the woods. I caught a glimpse of my captor's face, and I knew then that it was my brother. But he was no longer the Matt I had known and loved. He was a monster, a vessel for the evil that lurked inside those woods. I don't know how long I was held captive, but it felt like an eternity. In that darkness, I was subjected to unspeakable horrors that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I was beaten, starved, and forced to endure all manner of physical and psychological abuse. But worst of all was the feeling of utter hopelessness that consumed me. I was trapped in that place with no way out. But one day, I woke up to find that my captor was gone. I don't know how or why, but I didn't care. I knew that this was my chance to escape. I stumbled out of the cabin, my body weak and trembling. But as I made my way through the woods, I could feel something inside of me changing. It was like the darkness had taken root in my soul, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake it off. Ever since then, I'm sick. There's something wrong, and the doctors don't know what it is. There's no treatment for my symptoms. Not for the sleepwalking, the fever dreams, or the strange necrosis that's slowly eating me from the inside. They can't tell me whether I'll ever get better, or how much time I might have left before it's too late. The darkness that had taken over my brother's body had somehow seeped into mine, corrupting me from the inside out. But I fear that it may be too late for me. The necrosis continues to spread, and I can feel my mind slipping away. Sometimes I wonder if it's all in my head, if the darkness is nothing more than a figment of my imagination. But then I see the marks on my body, the scars that refuse to heal, and I know that it's as real as the look in my brother's eyes the night he shared his curse with me. Have you ever felt the forest staring back at you? Not the rustling leaves or the nocturnal sounds, but a presence, an unseen entity that breathes with the trees and whispers through the shadows. I've spent decades patrolling these woods as a park ranger, a witness to nature's beauty and brutality. But what I encountered out there, lurking beneath the canopy, made me question everything I thought I knew. It was late October, the trees were adorned in hues of crimson and gold, and the air held a biting chill. I received a distress call from a group of hikers who claimed they were lost in the woods. My gut told me something was off, a primal instinct that stirred unease within me. Ignoring protocol, I ventured alone into the maze of ancient trees, their twisted branches casting elongated shadows. As I navigated the labyrinthine trails, the silence became suffocating. No bird calls, no rustling leaves, just an eerie hush that clung to the air. I felt as though the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. I pushed forward, my senses on high alert, my hand resting on the grip of my revolver. That's when I saw her. A woman standing in the middle of the trail, her long hair obscuring her face. She was dressed in a flowing white gown that seemed to glow in the dim light filtering through the trees. But there was something about her that made my skin crawl. "Ma'am, are you lost?" I called out, my voice echoing through the forest. No answer. I took a few cautious steps forward, my heart pounding against my chest. The woman remained still, her face still obscured by her hair. As I got closer, I could see that her skin was deathly pale, almost translucent. "Ma'am, I'm a park ranger. Are you okay?" Suddenly, the woman's head snapped up, her hair falling away from her face. Her eyes were black as coal, and her lips twisted into a sinister smile. I gasped, taking a step back as she started to move towards me with an inhuman grace. I raised my gun, but I knew it would be useless against this otherworldly creature. The woman stopped, still grinning wickedly. "You shouldn't have come here," she hissed, her voice laced with a hint of amusement. "This forest belongs to us now." "Us?" The word echoed through my mind, sending shivers down my spine. I'd heard stories of supernatural beings inhabiting the woods, but I never believed them. Until now. I watched in horror as the woman transformed before my very eyes. Her skin rippled, bones cracking as she grew taller and her limbs elongated. Wings unfurled from her back, translucent and iridescent, like those of a dragonfly. Her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and her mouth stretched impossibly wide to reveal rows of glistening, razor-sharp teeth. I stumbled backwards, tripping over a tree root and hitting the ground hard. The creature loomed over me as she regarded me with soulless black eyes. Before I could react, she lunged at me, her teeth sinking into my shoulder. I screamed, unable to comprehend the pain that tore through me. She pulled away, blood dripping from her jaws as she laughed, a sound that echoed through the forest like a death knell. I collapsed in shock, clutching my wound and rolling to my side. I searched frantically, but I was alone again, thankfully. Or not. I tried to radio for help and got nothing but static. My heart dropped as I realized I was going to die out here, alone and forgotten, just another casualty in this godforsaken forest. My attacker's laughter echoed through the trees around me. That's when I realized I was still losing blood, and fast. The pain was slowly subsiding, my body weakening with each passing moment. Even if I wanted to get up and run, I wouldn't make it far. I was about to close my eyes for the last time when I heard a sound in the distance. It was faint, but unmistakable, a child's laughter. I turned my head, and through the haze, I could see a little boy standing in the middle of the trail, perhaps 100 feet away. He looked to be about 8 years old, with messy brown hair and a tattered shirt. He stared at me with eyes the color of the sky, and I recognized him instantly. My own son, who had died in a car accident years ago. "Chris," I whispered, "is that really you?" I felt a spark of hope ignite in my chest. "Do you know the way out of here?" I asked frantically. The boy just stared back at me from the safety of the tree line, those same pools of unnatural darkness where his eyes should have been. "Why did you kill me, Daddy?" The boy's voice reverberated as though he were whispering directly into my ear. I froze, my mind reeling as I tried to process what was happening. "What are you talking about?" I asked the boy, my voice trembling. "You heard me. You killed me in the car accident, remember? I told you not to drink and drive, but you did it anyway. You shouldn't have done that, Daddy. You promised you wouldn't leave me." The boy's voice was tinged with anger, the same way mine would be if I was scolding him. I remembered that night all too clearly. I had been a little tipsy, but I could still drive. But in my inebriated state, I made a stupid decision to drive over the speed limit. A decision I would have never made if my son hadn't been with me. A decision that cost him his life. "You killed me, Daddy. Now we're both trapped here in this forest, and we will never get out." I awoke in the hospital, apparently for the second time. The doctor said I had to be restrained and sedated the first time because I woke up crying, screaming my son's name over and over. I tried to make sense of what happened. By the time my colleagues found me near the trail, I'd nearly bled out. It was a miracle I survived, but I couldn't forget the words my son said to me even now, all these years later. Despite my injuries and regardless of the knowledge it couldn't really have been him, I'm going back there tonight. If I could just see him, maybe talk to him one more time, it will be worth it no matter what happens to me.